Hello, and welcome to the Spec Shaman Podcast, the show that explores the world of building product manufacturers, architects, and engineers, sustainable design, and technology and trends. We engage in thought-provoking discussions with renowned experts, industry pioneers, and visionaries who are making a significant impact in the construction industry. Join us as we explore groundbreaking ideas, revolutionary concepts, and the latest advancements shaping the built environment. The Spec Shaman Podcast is hosted by Laura Elliott, the lead instructional designer at Ron Blank and Associates. Laura is a seasoned interviewer with a passion for uncovering the untold stories behind success. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to the Spec Shaman Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Elliott. This special series on architectural door hardware is sponsored by SPC Alliance. Today, we are joined by Mateo Kristoff, VP of Sales and Marketing at Command Access. Hi, welcome to the podcast, Mateo.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm looking forward to getting into a conversation on the technical aspects of door hardware with you, Mateo. Could you start with some origins? How did you meet Michael O'Connor and Peter Sedgwick?
Yeah, so actually the original event that me and Peter met at was up in Canada for, it was at a smaller trade show that was hosted by our master rep and distributor up in Canada. And also that same group hosts an independent spec kind of meeting where you get one-on-one time with independent spec writers from across the US and Canada. And so pretty shortly after that, we joined that group and we're able to now, we just finished pre-ISC in Las Vegas, our second event with them, where you get about 25 to 30 minutes with independent spec writers from across North America.
I'm sure those days were really eye-opening for how specifications guide the design process. And it's really a unique field too. I know that architectural door hardware is a really specialized knowledge set. And so there must be a lot of learning kind of happening across the board in events like that. So that's very cool. I would like to get into the technical details. What are the benefits of an electrified lock hardware system over a mechanical hardware system?
So I'd say there's a lot of advantages with an electrified hardware locking system. So you no longer need to use a mechanical key for your employees or whoever's going to be, usually entering these doors. And so now you're able to send out a code, whether, depending on what kind of access control system you have, could be a one-time code, could be credentials, could be something they have set up on their phone. But now it gives you an audit trail. So you know who's coming through that door at what time. And I'm sure that could be used for employees clocking in. And also when you have employees that are leaving a company and you forget or they don't give back their keys with a credential or an access control system, it's easy just to, delete that user so that access that they had is no longer valid. And then there's also, other integrations that can happen that would be a benefit, and no longer needing to mechanically rekey, every time a key goes missing, especially if it's somebody's master key. Those are one of the big benefits of the cost of having to come out and rekey every time, a tenant turns over or that a key's lost. And then, with an electrified hardware system, you can set up schedules so that you can have, doors or certain doors unlocked during business hours and then only have, authorized users being able to use it after hours. And then when you get into things like ADA and operators, you're going to need something. You want that door to be positive latching. So you're going to need something to pull that latch out of the way so that the operator can open the door and engage. And so an electrified, device with latch retraction, would come in to do that work for the operator as well.
Those are all great advancements in access management. And I really like the ADA consideration as well. It's a really important thing to make sure is integrated into your access control system. But what if the power goes out in the building? How do the locks provide security in that scenario?
So yeah, that would depend on the function of the lock. So, we say typically a fail secure lock, which would imagine specified for most exterior doors would be fail secure means that when power fails, it fails secure, so it's going to stay locked. And there's certain codes like in stairwells for fire codes that you need a fail safe lock. And so these would be typically electronically locked. So when power is present, they're going to be locked. But in the case of a fire, most power supplies nowadays come with a fire alarm link, so it's tied into the fire system, and those doors would then all drop power so that the firemen can have access to these floors that would typically be locked. And a lot of power supplies also come with battery backup. So if there's any critical openings that, in the case of a power failure, you want to make sure are operating, including, I know that this is kind of a newer requirement coming across some states for low energy operators that, the batteries and on the battery backup for the power supply have enough to run those for a certain number of cycles.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense with those low operators. When you're looking at the security threats for doors and hardware, what do intruders use to try and access spaces, and how do electrified locking hardware systems protect against that?
Yeah, so I'm sure there's many other scenarios out there. One that comes to mind just because I have friends out of the industry that have somehow found these YouTube guys that try and get through, different access control systems. And one way that they've shown is with a PRI, so kind of a motion sensor that's on the inside of the door.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times on the security side, they're used for like an authorized egress or somebody exiting the building. So that motion from the interior of the door shows that it was somebody in the building exiting the door and kind of shunning an alarm versus that door getting pulled from the outside and forced open. And it seems like there's a lot of unique ways, like blowing smoke or, sticking something underneath the door if there's a crack somewhere in the door that they can, put something under there with some kind of like, I don't know, flag or mirror on there and move it around, and that will actually end up triggering that system.
Oh, wow.
So that they can gain entry and not shut the alarm off. So, there's a lot of other switches and a lot of manufacturers now are on the locking side. I think it's the PRIs are more used on the security side, but on the locking side now, what I would recommend is integrated switches into the hardware. So you can put a request to the exit into an exit device or into a cylindrical or mechanical lock, and that's integrated into the hardware. And so you don't have, cross traffic where somebody's just walking down the hallway and they're setting these switches off, or the potential of somebody actually trying to break in by, like I said, sticking something under the door and triggering it. Because now you actually have to physically push down the push pad on the inside of the door or pull down that lever to trigger that switch. And so that there's intent there, that is actually a person on the inside trying to get out. And some of these, you can add additional switches as well. So you can monitor like a latch bolt monitor, which is available on mortise locks and exit devices, would let you know if for some reason somebody taped that latch bolt so the door is closed or it looks secured, but actually it's not latched. And then, if you want to add even additional security, which we've seen on some orders, is they'll do a latchable monitor, door position switch, and a request exit. So that's monitoring 3 different places. So you know that the door is secure, that the latch bolt's extended, that the door position's letting you know the door's closed, and then you also have the request exit that would let you know that it's an authorized exit. So those are all options to help with additional security and understanding the state of your door, and if it's somebody that is an employee trying to get out versus somebody after hours on the external or the outside of the door trying to break in.
Yeah, those are the level of attempts, I think, is kind of impressive. And I'm sure it's always evolving. As the technology gets better, so do the intruders, right? So it's kind of a back and forth game of advancement. What about cybersecurity threats? Can they be an issue?
Yeah, I would imagine so. I'm I am not as familiar on that side of the world since we do more of the physical hardware, but I do know that just talking to different people out there that, some of these Wi-Fi locks and the standalone in certain applications that they feel like those could be more of a security risk, so that they're actually would rather have hardwired with a centralized, access control and power supply and all of that, because they feel like for their building or their campus or whatever, that is more secure than having, too many Bluetooth, Wi-Fi enabled locks everywhere.
Yeah, and I imagine that weather can also be an area of concern if you have like a natural disaster affecting the building. Does that have issues for egress and escape?
So it depends on what you're using to electronically secure the door. I would say that there are certain solutions out there that would be. One that comes to mind is mag locks, because they need constant power to remain, to keep that magnetism and remain secure. And, this kind of brings up a story from a few years ago, a natural disaster. I met somebody at a show from a big agency that had a bunch of buildings in the southeast, and battery backup only lasts for so long. So after 7 or 14 hours that the power on the batteries ran out, and they were using these mag locks, and so now all of the doors on all of their buildings, after I think it was 5 to 6 days before they could get back there, were all open and unsecured. So
Oh, wow.
that was one of the reasons that this gentleman was at the show looking for solutions. And the nice thing when you're integrating your electrified solution into the hardware is, so you maintain that positive latching. And like I mentioned earlier, as long as on an exit device, if you're doing latch retraction, you can only do it fail secure. So that means that anytime somebody needs to, they can get out. The push pad will always work, but it's always going to be electronically secured from the outside. So you don't need power to keep that secured. As long as the door closed, then it's latched and you're secure. And the same thing would be on mortise locks and cylindrical locks, as long as those were installed as fail secure and not fail safe.
Well, that's incredibly valuable. So how do you balance the need for high security with the demand for user convenience in these systems?
So I think it's important to understand what the customer or the end user needs, and making sure that you come up with a solution that's best suited for their needs. Sometimes, as I was speaking earlier, there's different monitoring switches. You can actually even put resistors into switches so you can see if they've been tampered with. And all of this is available, but sometimes it's not necessary. So I think first it's understanding the customer need, and most of the electrified hardware out there is in grade 1 hardware. I don't really know of any electrified hardware. I mean, outside of, what we see on the residential side with the smart deadbolts and everything, but everything on the commercial side is grade 1. So it's well built. It's, I would say, high security just as a standard. And I think electrifying it, you're just, adding an additional layer of security on top of a mechanically well-built lock or exit device.
Those are definitely thoughtful integrations. When you're looking at the common challenges to meet ADA compliance, how can electrified locking hardware help the occupants?
Yeah, I think that, as we're seeing a lot of new ADA codes come across the US, and it's been big in Canada for a number of years, you're seeing traditionally, we've seen it more on main doors where, typically they'd have an exit device, and now we're starting to see, operators go on, different sets of doors or single occupancy restrooms and things that don't have an exit device on there. And so you still need to figure out a way to securely latch the door when it's closed, but also to be able to retract that latch and get it out of the way so that the operator can engage and open the door. And so there's now these new solutions coming out where you have latch retraction in a mortise lock, latch retraction in a cylindrical lock, and of course, now latch retraction kits or exit devices as options. So that really helps with the integration with the operator. And then there's some other support components that are necessary. Some operators would have it on board. Some would not, where you need to sequence everything. You need the 88, kind of touch buttons or touchless or actuators. So I think as we're seeing this grow too, there's also a need for, putting together the whole solution or the package so that you understand before you're at the door and wondering, hey, why is my operator not being able to fire off my exit device or my lock, or they are, but they're fighting against each other. So being able to have a resource for, wiring diagrams and somebody that's kind of gone through and put together all the pieces you need. And that really helps because, now you have, like in California, a push pad. They have it as 5 pounds of force. So I think traditionally it's been 15 pounds of force, and now for California, it's 5 pounds of force is required as the max to be able to push that pad and exit the door, which is tough because then, as we're kind of weakening these push pad springs, there's the potential of, okay, is the pad going to return all the way now and relatch? And so I think being able to integrate, an electrified device in there and the low energy operator helps a lot, because if you are a person that really needs assistance, now you just hit that button and you don't have to worry about, pushing the pad or how much force that you need to get through that door. You push the button and it does all the work for you.
Well, I mean, I love that. And I imagine that has taken a lot of iterations and a lot of problem solving across the industry to make something so simple and meaningful for access to everyone. So I appreciate the thoroughness in your expertise on that topic. When we're looking at the product lifespan, what are the common hardware failures to look out for, and what should design professionals be aware of when specifying door hardware?
So I would say the biggest potential issue that I would want to make everybody aware of when you're not as much on just electrified hardware, but more so with latch retraction. And like we just mentioned, it's growing, and not just in exit devices and mortise locks and cylindrical locks. And when you have latch retraction, there's a inrush that happens that isn't typical in your standard electrified locks and strikes and stuff. And so it's just the power requirements. So we see, quite often, I would say, on people I talk to, that typically if there's a potential pain point that comes up on an installation, and sometimes it's hard because also these, your division 8 doesn't always have the power supply under their scope, and so that's coming out of 28. And at a 28, if they're used to using a security power supply, then it might be great for their access control or cameras, or even, will be fine for again some of the smaller power requirement locks and strikes. But once you get into latch retraction, it's not sufficient, especially if these are going on main doors, that are high traffic. And so a lot of the times we're recommending, or I'm recommending to people, that you need to use a locking hardware power supply, something that's a linear power supply that's built to do the heavy lifting for the hardware, and that's designed specifically to accommodate those inrush requirements for latch retraction devices. And I think another bonus is it kind of becomes a system protection relay, so that any, when you're putting wires through a swinging door, shorts and stuff like that happening, just kind of come with the territory. And so being able to have that all isolated to a locking hardware power supply means that, more expensive access control boards and systems and all of that is isolated from any of that.
Oh, you just touched on one of my next questions, which is how does the wiring for electrified cylindrical locks get installed without compromising that door structure?
Yeah, so it's always important to know, whenever I'm talking to somebody that's working on, a new job or a job walk or anything like that, I think it's important for people to understand that electrified hardware isn't necessarily like, the magic bullet or pill, that it's not you're gonna add a power supply electrified hinge and a latch retraction, device, and now the opening's going to be magically, brand new and working again. That you have to make sure that mechanically that opening is already working, as it should. So the exit device should mechanically already be working and be adjusted. There shouldn't be any rod issues. The hinges or the door shouldn't be sagging, because somebody put standard weight hinges on a door that's 10 feet tall and weighs however many pounds, and really they needed to put heavyweight or something more robust on that door. So I think as long as that is accounted for beforehand, then you put a electrified transfer hinge on the non-load bearing portion of the door. So it's going to be, if you have 4 hinges on the door, it's going to be one of the 2 middle ones. And as long as that's not on the bottom or the top, then you won't have any issues. And so I think it's just some of those little things. And then again, as long as you have your exit device adjusted properly, then electrifying it should be a smooth process.
Everybody loves the smooth process, that's for sure. When you're doing a cost benefit analysis, how do electrified locks compare to traditional or mechanical locks? and including considering installation, maintenance, and longevity.
Yeah, so I think that electrified locks just versus a mechanical lock is going to be more expensive. I think that, you know, I haven't done all of those calculations because I don't have those numbers handy, but I would imagine that the benefit or the savings comes in when you start accounting for, okay, how many times have I had to rekey something, or has
Right.
somebody lost their key and I had to, send, or I had to get up and, leave a meeting or interrupt my day to go let somebody in, or if it's a bigger building, then maybe the security, officers going over there to let certain people in. And so I think, time and the money involved in that with mechanical keys, I think would be where you see your savings. And there's been a lot of improvements over the last 10 to 15 years where I think that, in the 90s, electrified hardware was kind of a special order item, it was a long lead time, it was a high price, where now it's common. So, their normal lead times, the prices come down, where across the industry, you're seeing, certain manufacturers holding their electrified price or not really bumping it as much, where that mechanical price is creeping up so that there's not as much of a gap.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say from a longevity standpoint, again, I think that, mechanical, because there's no electronics in there, is going to last longer, but that a lot of these electrified products are being cycle tested and lasting years. So I gotta, time to time get an email from somebody who's working on a exit device and wants to know if I can send them an update for it. And, this has been going for 10, 12 years strong,
That's awesome.
and yeah, so a lot of these will last a lot longer than the warranty state. A lot of these guys are working for 8, 10, 12 years in the field. So
That's awesome. So, like, what are the common
Yeah.
applications? Like, what areas of growth are you seeing in this industry in commercial spaces? Are there parts of the industry that didn't seek this out as frequently that now are?
I feel like we're seeing just the percentage of electrified hardware on jobs grow across the board,
Hmm.
where maybe in years past, because of price or just because of preference, you would only see, you know, the front door, the back door, and maybe the owner's office or the server room have an electronic lock or exit device on there. Where now it just seems like that percentage of the building, people are adding more and more doors to be electrified versus mechanical. And I think that's, yeah, driven by the state of the world that we're at, where people are preferring more and more security and peace of mind. And I'm sure some of it's by local code. And again, some of that is also driven by ADA codes. And as we're seeing more low energy operators go into buildings, then you're going to have more electrified hardware as well going into buildings. So I think it's a little bit of everything.
I definitely am seeing it on my end, where the space for security and any component or hardware that supports that is more and more being applied in in almost every building sector. And I think it's interesting to watch that field grow. Um, when we're looking at, like, and this kind of flows into that, historical spaces or already existing buildings, what are some of the available options if you're going to do some retrofitting retrofitting existing cylindrical locks with electrified components? How do we work with existing infrastructure?
Yeah, so I recommend typically that if you're going into, whether it's a historical building where you have to maintain an aesthetic, or it's just a preference of the customer to try and reuse existing hardware. Maybe, they've been in this space, under a year or for not very long, where they want to try and, utilize the existing hardware since it's relatively brand new. Then it depends on, what locks and exit devices they have out there, but I would say that there's definitely a lot of options available for exit devices and cylindrical locks where you know they're able to, if they can, send those in, and I can take a mechanical cylindrical or mortise lock or exit trim, and I can add, a motor or a solenoid into those and send them back to be, so that now you have that existing lock that is now an electrified lock set. And with Panics, it's a little bit easier because, for most grade 1 exit devices out there, there are field installable motorized latch retraction kits. So you don't actually even have to take the hardware off the door. You can actually
cool.
just, electrify it in the field. And, even when you get into, some hinges on, historical buildings, more common on the East Coast than I would say where I'm from in California, but it is something that comes up where somebody will call me and they'll send me a picture, and it's like, Jesus, like a medieval hinge. I haven't seen something like this outside of the movies. And I'll say, yeah, no problem, send it in, and we'll figure out, or I'll figure out a way to add some wires there and create a power transfer hinge out of that, and they're able to maintain that aesthetic, because I don't know where you'd find a medieval hinge these days. So yeah, it works out.
That could be its own show, retrofitting these historical buildings. I think it's got to be pretty fun on some levels because of what you're working with and how you're trying to keep that historical aesthetic. It's got to be interesting.
Yeah, that would be fun. I've never got to go to one of these buildings. I just see the hinges, but yeah, I would be all up for traveling and, helping install and checking out the building.
That'd be
So
a
as long
great
as
little
it's not,
YouTube series.
yeah, we might be onto something.
There you go. So from history to the future, what emerging technologies do you believe will have the most significant impact on the security industry in the next 5-10 years?
I think we're going to see just a continued evolution of existing hardware, that we've already been talking about, but probably adding new functions and capabilities. I don't think that the hardware world moves as fast as the security side, and we also have a ridiculous amount of mechanical hardware out there, and so we're somewhat constrained on how fast you can move forward. But I think the capabilities, potentially the monitoring and things like I've mentioned that didn't even exist last year, like latch retraction and a cylindrical lock, I'm happy to say in the next few weeks that will exist. And so
Very cool.
I think that electrifying locking mechanisms, I could see on our side of the world kind of growing and expanding potentially outside of what we've thought as of commercial door hardware. And you already see it with some factories where they're electrifying cabinet locks, they're electrifying some kind of locking mechanism for data servers and cages. And so I just think that as we're monitoring and want to secure more and you want it on the same system, that we're going to be electrifying non-traditional locking mechanisms. Um, on the security side, yeah, I would just take a guess that we're going to see, yeah, just a more seamless interaction. I'm sure that there's some that are getting close where now, it's a lot better than where we were with a mechanical key, but with each generation, we have less patience for interacting with things because, you know, with our phones and some of the newer technology, it's so seamless that, having to get your credential out of your, purse or your wallet to badge in or enter a code, could be, I think, viewed as an annoyance. So being able to just somehow utilize camera and your phone to almost identify as you're walking up to a door that, you're an authorized user, and just being able to almost interact and go through that door just like it was not electrified or never locked.
Yeah, those are great advancements, and it's really exciting to see. It's one industry, but it's more than that, right? There's there's all the people that are working in the different components to make access control truly functional and effortless for the user. So it's fun to watch this advancement happen in real time. So, could you share some insights on the development of a field power supply and its impact on testing electrified hardware before energy comes online?
Yeah. So traveling around as a sales guy, you see a lot of different interesting, methods that installers have come up with to troubleshoot or test new installations in the field. And I personally, when I would go out and test or troubleshoot, would be lugging around a big power supply and had a long extension cord just, crossing my fingers that there was an outlet close enough to the door that it would reach and I could get everything testing. And ran across a customer that had kind of created something unique, but um, kind of a rough version of it. And I thought it was a great idea. And so we kind of collaborated and created Field Tester. And it's a variable voltage, so it's adjustable from 10 to about 27 volts. And you can dial it to test anything in between that range. And it just works off your cordless drill batteries. That 18 or 20 volt battery becomes the power source. You just slide it into our field tester, it lights up, and now you can easily at the door test new installations, because a lot of time the hardware is being installed a week, maybe 2 weeks before the security team comes behind and hooks up everything. And so when you walk away from that door, okay, this opening was working. And then if you do get into the, situation where you get a call back and, with a potential hardware issue, you can actually just hook it up right at the hinge and test. And if the hardware works, it's not a hardware issue. It's either an access control or a power supply issue. Or if the hardware doesn't work, then that it's a hardware issue, but it just points you in the right direction.
Yeah.
And makes things a lot easier for field techs.
Yeah, it simplifies the troubleshooting aspects, that's for sure.
Mhm.
I love practical innovation. So I think that's a great thing that you came up with.
Yeah, and I think especially as we're seeing in the industry, this division 28 and 8 are overlapping more and more every year. And, you know, a lot of times the power supply is under the division 28 side. And they're great power supplies, but a lot of times they're not created to do the heavy lifting of electrified locking hardware. And so it makes things really easy when, you hook up an exit device and it's not working. It's easy to assume that's the issue because that's where the symptom arises, but I would say probably 70% of the time it's usually a power related issue, and you could trace it back to the power supply. So it'll save you a lot of time and headaches having a field tester.
Absolutely. I can definitely see its value.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about your project at the University of Cincinnati?
Yeah. So a few years ago, the University of Cincinnati came to us with a large retrofit opportunity where they were looking at updating their existing, some mechanical, some solenoid devices, but they were looking for a way to add motorized latch retraction without having to replace the devices. And so we had to confirm what power supplies they had, and we're able to, just with offering our latch retraction kit and a new power supply, they were able to upgrade quite a few buildings while maintaining the existing hardware over a few months.
I'm sure that was very is a good timeline for them to work under too, for sure.
Yeah, we were able to get them a large initial portion of the project so that they could keep working, and whenever they were getting low, they would just let us know. We release another phase, and they were able to stick within their budgets and accomplish the whole update without the cost of replacing hardware. So they were very happy.
That's excellent. That's excellent. A primary goal of this podcast is to build a catalog of wisdom for the industries that we serve. What is one piece of advice that you would like to share with our audience in closing?
A quote I always refer back to is the wrong question is how can I be successful? The right question is how can I be useful? So
I just want to thank you so much for joining us today, Mateo. Your insights and your expertise is really astounding, and I've enjoyed talking with you today.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Laura. I appreciate the time, and it was a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully look forward to coming back soon, or at least seeing you on our YouTube show.
Yeah.
Historical buildings.
Yes, historical buildings. I'm all for it. My background is strong in history, so that would be a great time. Well, I just want to thank you all for joining us today and sharing your insights into a really unique space of the built environment. There's a lot that we learned, and we're grateful and appreciate the time that you spent here today.
Thank you for listening to the Spec Shaman podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our show and leave us a review. The Spec Shaman podcast is produced by Laura Elliott and Brad Blank. A huge thank you to our guests who made this show possible. Building product manufacturers who want to increase their specification opportunities, please visit specshaman.com or ronblank.com. Thanks all for this episode, folks. See you next time.